So this brings us nicely to our next session, which is to do with landscape policy making, both nationally and globally. And first up, we have Richard Burden, who's a past president of the Landscape Institute, and he overlapped with Hal when they were on council together, and he's going to tell us about that time. So over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Tim. We've heard a lot today about Hal's professional expertise and the way of getting on with clients and the ways to make sure that projects actually progress. I'm going to focus a bit more on the tenacity needed when you're in a pivotal role in a professional body that's going through a period of change and realizing that the world is changing around it. So to say that the practice of Colvin and Moggridge had a long tradition of supporting and promoting the Institute of Landscape Architects and the Landscape Institute is a bit of an understatement, I think. Brenda Colvin played a formative role with the Institute of Landscape Architects and fully supported the change of emphasis from the landscape architect to the landscape with the title of Landscape Institute. Hal carried this forward, joining council in 1970 and engaging committees at a time when council met 9 times a year to sustain its momentum, and virtually all the behind-the-scenes work was done by the members because there are only a couple of staff. Hal quickly engaged with enhancing the management of the ILA with papers on the duties of council and the executive committee and guidelines on organising annual conferences. Hal was vice president for the 4 years, 75 to 79, when Bill Gillespie and Arnold Weddle were formulating, taking forward and implementing the transformation of the LI with all the consultations, processes of change, ups and downs, formal general meetings, and the realities of making it happen. I've been aware of the proposed expansion of the ILA into the LI through my involvement with the working panel of local authority ecologists. In any case, I had a strong leaning towards landscape architecture, having been Arnold Weddle's first postgraduate researcher at Sheffield in 1969 to 71. Encouraged to join the Landscape Institute Council on behalf of the landscape scientists in April 1978, I found Prof Weddle as president and Hal as one of 2 vice presidents. In those days, the structure and organisation of the LI were a bit of a mystery to me. Hal took the helm at an auspicious time. 1979 was the golden jubilee of the formation of the ILA and a couple of years into the transformation of the LI. The post-war period had seen a blooming national awareness of public landscapes and the need for their management, the establishment of new town corporations with landscape teams, and the evolution of the planning system where industry was required to integrate with its environment. The profession had moved away from the pre-war focus on gardens and private landscapes, and 2/3 of the membership were employed in the public sector. Hal was elected a fellow in April 1978 and took on the mantle of president in 79, having successfully organised the Agro Landscapes 2 Symposium, built bridges with Barley, the British Association of Landscape Industries, in taking forward the JCLI form of contract, engaged with the Building Research Establishment on trees in relation to buildings, and helped resolve a sensitive internal disciplinary matter. His support for the admissions assessment panel enabled the recruitment of landscape managers and landscape scientists to progress slowly but surely, and calming the concerns of the established landscape designers that they would be swamped by those new members. A youthful Hal tactfully set out his view ahead and priorities for consideration in the November 79 edition of Landscape Design. Students, sustaining training courses and maintaining professional standards were high on the list, as were encouraging individual members to promote the profession, making technical and professional information readily available, and creating greater public visibility of expertise by novel means. A focus on contacts with government and public bodies, together with parallel professional bodies, foresaw a significant presidential role for the following decades. However, my files show that despite the debates and special meetings to progress the expansion of previous presidencies, Hal's presidency also had its share of special general meetings. These were around the objects of the Institute, because the charity commissioners were stuck with a 1958 version of the ILA objectives. There were revisions to the Code of Conduct, and the scale of fees was a significant issue, and how members could promote themselves and their work. One of the papers that I found from council at that time stated that the cost of living and costs of running a practice had risen by a factor of 3.75 between 1970 and 1980. Reflecting, I realised that I'd bought a house for £8,000 in 1972 and sold it for £24,000 in 1979. So that factor of inflation probably was true. At the time, the PSA, that government organisation taking charge of lots of work, were refusing to pay for landscape work on the 1979 scale of fees. And the Office of Fair Trading were threatening the court over the fixed fees. Whilst the RIBA and RTPI moved forward with liberalising practice promotion and limited liability, the LI's move to keep up with the field fell by one vote at a June 1980 SGM. The ship was in need of a steady hand on the tiller. In those days, the President also led the Executive Committee, getting things done that Council had decided was needed. And Hal established a policy committee, including Andrew Bannister and myself, to turn aspirations into plans. A feasibility study for a landscape foundation was commissioned, but that founded 18 months later on the impracticability of raising £30,000 to initiate fundraising. The loss of £7,500 on the IFLA Cambridge conference in '79 overshadowed Council's discussions on finances. As happened in later decades, the financial viability of the journal Landscape Design was a regular feature of council meetings. Accommodation at Carlton House Terrace was deemed insufficient, and a working party soon found that accessibility from the regions was a determinative factor. The budget for 1981-82 proposed a 40% increase in subscriptions across the categories of membership. Some choppy waters for the President to navigate. On a brighter note, the principle establishing a gold medal award for outstanding achievement by senior members was achieved in 1979 October, to be operated by a special award jury of the LI officers. And a jubilee group of honorary members, largely outside the profession, but hugely influential in the environment and influencing and supporting the Institute, were selected and appointed. These were Lady Susan Jellicoe, Patrick Nutchins, Professor Hoskins, and Sidney Chapman, MP. The process of doing that was described as a bit haphazard, and so Hal set out future guidelines which many successive presidents have used to recognise achievement and both practical and physical and political support for the Institute. I would add that that role of honorary members in important places, which Hal initiated, has been pretty vital over the years to get things done. A proposal for creating new urban parks via garden exhibitions has been floated to Lord Belwyn, who was at DOE, by the LI and supported by Barley. And in September 1980, some organisational criteria were supported by the Institute Council. And Council also gladly accepted Hal's proposal to establish an annual lecture. And William Clark, for 10 years Vice President of the World Bank, provided the first one in 1981. Chapters, the forerunner of branches, were encouraged to be proactive a formula proposed to fund them, and successful and profit-making annual conferences were organised by the Southwest and Southeast chapters. The Hong Kong chapter was established. The proposal for a referendum, but non-binding, of the members around promotion and limited liability was dropped. And in March 1981, guidance was provided, in advance of a special general meeting, that paid entries in directories did not constitute advertising and were permissible. A little bit different from today's glamorous practice websites. Probably because everyone had different ideas about how promotion of the expanded institute should be done, 1979 to 80 saw a succession of PR committee reports making little progress. Hal put the committee into abeyance for 80 and 81, and many of the chapters took up the challenge of local promotion of the profession. Great things were reported from IFLA by the past president, but accounts were not forthcoming, and the LI was threatening to withhold its subscription. A presentation by Hal to the House of Commons Urban Affairs Committee led to an invitation for an LI exhibition in the upper waiting hall, which council enthusiastically put £1,000 towards. Horticultural Trades Association put in 500, and the South East chapter offered to man the event for the week of the 20th of July 1981. Gordon Howe designed and set it up. The Landscape Institute was well and truly raised in relevant political quarters. Becoming past president simply meant Hal was able to turn his energies to projects from July 1981. Engaging with the new IFLA treasurer at the Vancouver conference, reinsurers around accounting were received and the formula was negotiated over the UK subscription. A special design assessment for the 194 responding senior student members gradually made its way through repeated consultations, and in November 1982, the principles agreed. It was, however, April 1983 that the Education Committee got the red light to organise the assessment in the summer or autumn of 1984. The potential LI office move to the Chelsea Physic Garden, initially looking rosy, began to stall when new trustees were installed there. However, on a more enthusiastic note, the garden's exhibition concept was steaming ahead. Somewhat perversely, the Toxteth riots in Liverpool galvanised political action, and following a brief meeting with Hal and Brian Clouston in July 1981, where Brian produced an outline plan of how to do it, Michael Heseltine leapt upon the idea, swiftly announced it would happen in 1984. Hal was immediately involved in the steering committee and ensuring that LI practices were engaged, and all that was pretty time-consuming, I would imagine, from what I've seen. JCLI Management Limited was established to oversee the construction, and exhibition had become the more interactive festival. And by November 1982, Joe Samworth's practice had been appointed to prepare the master plan for the next one in Stoke, before Liverpool was even built. By that stage, the steering committee at Merseyside had been disbanded, and Hal had set the course for the strong LI input into all future garden festivals. Reflecting on the academic side of things, during Hal's time on council, the LI had been striving to impress the Social Science and Research Council that training and practice of landscape architecture includes research, and that was in order to enable students and practitioners to claim support grants. Landscape surveys and analysis were cited as research. As we've been hearing, Hal's rigour, objectivity, and measurements in such projects as London Skyline and Blenheim both endeared him to the new science and management members, gave an example of research, and was an exemplar and forerunner of the value-neutral approach to landscape characterisation. Hal was released from council in 1983, but that didn't mean that he didn't continue to be productive and engaged, because he was chair of the International Committee from 1986 to 92, continued to be the LI delegate to IFLA from 1980 to 99. I took a break and then picked it up again from 2002 to 2006. So one starts to think about all this going on, whilst all those things that you've been hearing about of actual practical landscape work. And somebody said, how does he find the time to do it? It's absolutely amazing. Anyway, moving on. Whether to and how to seek a royal charter took up much of my time as honorary secretary and then as vice president. By 1995, a draft charter had been agreed as acceptable by the Privy Council, and a special general meeting was held in Birmingham, 16th of March 1966, with a number of past presidents present to authorise the formalities. Accepting the principle was easy, but there were many, many amendments to the future name. Tim Gale was called upon to take the chair.
Can we move towards a conclusion, Richard? Sorry, we are
running over. Yeah, well, you've seen the draft. I didn't call Tim Gale up then, but he was called up to take the chair as Alan Tate was promoting some amendments, and I was leading the charter group. I sensed there would have been some gentle nudging behind the scenes from a certain past president to keep the focus on landscape rather than the landscape architect. And the title Landscape Institute prevailed, as had been enthusiastically supported by Brenda Colvin 20 years before. So Geoffrey Jellicoe had wanted the Royal Landscape Institute, but that's a separate process. During David Jarvis's presidency in 2002, Hal was selected for the award of the gold medal. And the announcement was somewhat understated in landscape design as a small news item. And I haven't found out whether Hal actually got the medal around his neck at all at that stage.
I did. I've had the medal twice, actually.
Ah, right. So
I amend the second one.
I amend the script a tad. However, as I say, Hal's been doing loads of things behind the scenes and kept a weather eye on LI affairs with sustained tenacity. 2007 saw a modified charter despite advice from experienced members, changed the role of council and introduced an executive board. 2008 saw a national financial crisis and the Institute income took a dive and downsizing was the order of the day. Aside from Barnard Muse, the library and archives were the tangible assets of the LI. A proposal that they should be disposed of caused consternation in many circles. Hal produced a pamphlet on the history of the library and played a significant role at the EGM in January 2009 that voted for their retention. Hal and Rafe Cobham set up the Library and Archive Voluntary Conservation Group to ensure that the wishes of members were followed. More choppy waters and counter currents were negotiated, and in 2014 saw the Library and Archives safely harboured at Merle and the establishment of FOLAR. In 2016, the LI board revised the conditions for the LI medal. As part of the 2019 celebrations of the 1929 to 2019, the ever enthusiastic Adam White gathered past presidents and influential guests at Chelsea to ensure that Hal was seen far and wide with the gold medal round his neck. I've just been confirmed that this does count as a unique double gold. In terms of his services to the profession and the Institute, Hal is surely worthy of that double gold accolade. Thank you.